What's the use in having a credit shelter trust for a married couple when you can just use portability? There's a big difference, and we're going to walk you through this video today and tell you why it's a big difference and how it works. All right, so I'm Jeff Mersace, the Plain English Attorney. Welcome to the video. We're happy you can join us. Let's take a look at these two kind of tax ways to double up the estate tax credits for a married couple in the United States. And we're talking about federal estate taxes. If you have any more than 15 million, this is a number as of July 4th, 2025, over 15 million, all right, it's basically getting taxed at 40%. That's an extremely large percentage, but it's also a pretty high threshold for a lot of people. But this is for those out there who may get towards that 15 million or over. The worst thing you could do as a married couple is not make use of both the tax credits. U.S. citizens, they can, if they're married, they can pass as much property as they want between them at death without any estate taxes. It's just when the second spouse passes on, everything they have is now subject to estate taxes. And that's why we've often talked about using a credit shelter trust as a way to apply that tax coupon for the first spouse who passes on. All right, so let's take a look at that. When we're looking at a revocable living trust, we call it an ABC trust. I'm going to refer you to a video and we'll also have it linked, where you have the A trust is for the surviving spouse, the B trust takes up to half of that money from the trust in, applies the tax credits, and then in the future, any growth on that, well, look, there's no estate taxes on it when the second spouse passes on. It's already been examined for that. That B trust just kind of moves along, pays its taxes on dividends and income, capital gains, and whatnot, as if it were its own taxpayer. And there are some ways to kind of lower that. We're not going to dig into that. But basically, it's applying that first tax coupon when the first spouse passes on. And then the surviving spouse, well, whatever they have in their, quote, half or more, they have their tax coupon when they pass on. So what is this portability thing? Well, it was a way to make things easier. The government just wanted to make it easier. And as with most of these deals with government, you really have to make sure you're taking a look at the fine print so that you're not going to come up surprised. In a lot of cases, for a lot of my clients, it may not be the best deal possible if you're using the government way to do it. That sounds simple. You may have to put in a little more work, maybe a little more complicated, but there may be vastly better benefits. This very well may be one of them.
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
Portability is simply filling out the correct forms, including a estate tax return when the first spouse passes on, and just moving their credits. So if that spouse passed on after July 4th, 2025, and they said, I don't want to do this credit shelter trust thing, I'm just going to take their 15 million and move it over to me. All right, now you have 30 million in tax credits. However, your tax credits, your 15 out of the 30, will continue to grow over time, but the spouse's stays at 15. Now it's all about the numbers and what does that say? So with this revocable trust, everything gets split. You're putting stuff into the B side of the trust, and it may overflow into the C. That would be a much larger estate. But let's go ahead and use a $28 million example. So if we have a $28 million estate, and we decide, all right, we're just going to do the portability. All right. That estate tax return goes in when the first spouse passes on, the election is made, the credits move over to the surviving spouse, and then when they pass on, apply all of those tax credits, meaning the spouses plus whatever, 15 plus whatever it grew to, and then the 15 from the first spouse. Doesn't matter if it's 2 years or 20 years or 40 years later, it was only the 15 that got added to that surviving spouse's tax credits. All right, so if it were a credit shelter trust, Well, now you're dealing with some accounting. You're dealing with treating it separately. It is an irrevocable trust that's kind of set up within that ABC trust tax structure. And you have to have your assets put in there. You have to account for it separately. We have to make sure the income is done correctly to minimize income taxes. So the income typically goes to the surviving spouse every year, but the growth just stays in and goes up. Okay. So you got to have that tax return each year. Oh, wow. That sounds like it could be an awful headache with the accountant. Well, it may be. If you're not used to this, or you have an accountant who's not used to it, it could be a pain for them as well. If you want more out of the B trust, so in other words, there are assets over in that B trust, and you want to take them out of the principal, well, now there has to be some standards and guidelines. Typically, you're allowed to take out up to 5% or $5,000 each year. Or if it's beyond that, it has to be a demonstrated need. In other words, that surviving spouse needs to say and prove, yeah, that money is needed to maintain my standard of living. I've exhausted my assets. Okay, yeah, that is a little bit more of a pain. But how much is that actually worth? Well, it's a good thing that I went and I did the numbers on this. And so for a $28 million estate, let's just say it's all inside the trust, one spouse passes on. In the A trust, we're going to move 14 million, and in the B trust, 14 million. We're applying that tax coupon. So anything that grows in the B trust over time, it's going to be estate tax free when the second spouse passes on. When that surviving spouse passes on, let's just say it's 20 years later, they have their tax credits. Now, they have their 15 million, but that's indexed going up, and it's anticipated it's about a 3% growth rate in those tax credits. What if we're actually investing the assets that are in both the A and the B? Well, taking a look at the numbers, it was about what was it, 10.3% growth average. So just apply it across the board. I know when you've got ups and downs, it's going to have different numbers, but let's just keep it as exactly even so that we're looking at the numbers. So that A trust in 5 years, that's going to be and go from 14 million to about 20, almost 23 million. And then another 5 years. Okay, now it's up to about 37 million. By the time we hit 2045, that surviving spouse, their portion, again, just using this example that the income that they were getting is enough, that's going to get up to $99,457,670.85. Yeah, that's all according to Excel and a little bit of numbers that we're pulling and calculating. What about that B trust? Oh, well, that in identical fashion is going to have $99,457,670 and yeah, that same 85 cents. All right. So we're talking about close to 200 million. All right. So what are the taxes that are going to need to be paid on that 99 million out of the A trust in this scenario, because we use the credit shelter trust? We went through all that accounting each year. All right, the estate taxes are still going to be substantial, about almost 29 million. So we take a look at that number, it's almost 29 million in estate taxes. Okay. What if instead we did that portability? So we moved that $15 million exemption over to the surviving spouse. Now, the spouse is 15 million. That's going to keep going up with time. But the first deceased spouse, that remains at 15 million and it does not grow. All right, well, now the numbers are looking a little bit different. All right, so we have that portability transferred at exactly 15 million. So the total that's exempt in 2025 is 30 million. So if that surviving spouse passes on, they've got 30 million of exemptions. Move ahead 5 years, we're at 2030. All right, that A trust has about 45 million in it, a little more. That B trust is also going to have its 40, well, that's all in one trust, so it's up to 40 million. 2035, almost 75 million. All right, get to 2040, 121 million, and then we get to 2045, yeah, it's almost $200 million. So what are the exemptions at that point? Well, that grew to 42 million. So the estate tax for this whole combined estate, because it all went to the surviving spouse, but the portability credits went, the estate tax is $62,729,469.08. Okay, it's that much more. You're paying an extra almost $34 million because you didn't want to deal with 20 years of trust tax returns and dealing with an accountant. That's what the family's going to lose. Almost 34 million extra. All right. So when you're looking at the time value of money and things growing over time, you should be looking at this credit shelter trust the same way you would look at a Roth IRA. If you pay the tax up front by applying those tax credits when the first spouse passes on and having that B trust set up, everything else that's going to grow is going to avoid a 40% whack when the second spouse passes on for whatever's growing in the B trust. Yeah, you pay your income taxes along the way and all that other stuff on that, on the growth and exchanges, but that's it. You're not going to end up having that huge estate tax. And then the surviving spouse applies that too. If you just say, oh, I'm leaving it all to the surviving spouse because, oh, it's just going to be easier to give them my credits at today's value, then it's not the same. It would be more like a rollover as opposed to giving them a Roth. And so if you can give them the Roth and the only real expenses are the accounting each year for the next 20 years, that's a huge amount of savings. So look, just being lazy about, I don't want to do this tax return. I don't want to have to separate the assets. I want things to be easier. Hey, before you decide to do that, really take a look at the numbers because this really could be costing your family an awful lot. So, I hope you found that information useful. Again, we're going to reference back to the other video to talk more about the Married ABC Trust and exactly how it works. But the thing that I just encourage you, make sure that you are taking a hard look at things. If that first spouse passes on and the accountant goes, oh, well, we can just go do portability. Oh, wait a minute. Let's take a look at what the numbers would look like if we applied that tax coupon now on a credit shelter trust. What kind of costs are we talking about each year? But how much can that money grow and not be subject to estate taxes on the back end? You might want to take a look at that and see just how much you can save the family. All right. So as I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.